Welcome everyone to the Indie Spotlight recap video for October of 2019. As always, each month I take games that are submitted by developers and play them on stream to give little known games a little free coverage and more awareness for them. We're always doing these at least once a month, and if you'd like to submit a game, please get in touch. But as I said, all games were submitted, so these are all press key plays. And this was definitely the month of too many games. As we had so many titles, I had to split the spotlight into two separate streams. So you'll be seeing all of it in this video. But we're going to be starting off with the game Revan. And you're not hearing any music because we played this with developers and we were chatting with them during the stream. This is a kind of a third-person shooter cross MOBA game. At the moment, it is in alpha testing. I'll include a link to their Discord channel and where they would like me to link back to in the description down below if you'd like to join it, as they run, I think it's either weekly or monthly playtest sessions on it. But keep in mind, with the game being in early alpha, what you see may not represent the current version of it. But the general idea is that this is a MOBA in the sense that we're taking over control points, earning resources. But instead of having champions, as in a League of Legends, Dota, whatever, all the customization comes in the form of what skills and abilities you put onto your character. So, what you were looking at a minute ago at the inventory screen is that you're able to choose from various abilities that you can slot into your character. They can give your character advanced shielding, healing, stun grenades, dash teleport, etc., etc. And you can then upgrade those further by using the resources you earn while you're battling around on the map. Now, the version that we played was, I believe it was 3-on-3. I think the developer said that they could go up to 4-on-4, but I don't remember that 100% off the top of my head. But the general practice, as with MOBAs, is that you and your team will go out, try to claim territory in the form of these control points. The control points will then feed you resources, which you can then use to upgrade your character. And the upgrades come in several forms. The aforementioned abilities that we just mentioned, as well as slotting in new mods or upgrading your guns themselves. And this is very important, because this is not like a traditional MOBA where as you level up you'll gain access to character specific abilities, and it's basically kept very linear along those lines. You are free to upgrade your character however you see fit, and I didn't, when I first started playing it, I didn't even realize you could upgrade your gear, as well as giving yourself more health, higher recharge rates, and so on. Now, the one thing that you are not going to see in this footage is kind of the creep style management. The developers talk about how you can send out minions to attack the enemy's bases and move forward their HQ, but because I was focused more on the combat side, I didn't really get to see anything in terms of the building. I'm going to fast forward the footage just a little bit further to the second game where I was a little bit more comfortable with the rules and what was happening. But I did like the general feel of Revan. As we were talking about on stream, you don't really see player skill focused MOBAs all that much. Again, a lot of them are built around the RPG abstraction of leveling up your character, getting gear, and kind of focusing on that layer of complexity. The closest, I think, analog to Revan may be something like Super Monday Night Combat or some of the smaller scale games that probably aren't even around anymore for you to play. With that said, in terms of, I think, concerns or criticisms right now, a lot of it, I think, is really more on the presentation side. We were talking about this on stream, but the game is still very early in terms of development. This art that you've seen so far and what's going on right now, none of that is finalized for obvious reasons. I think they said they were going to be doing an art pass or an aesthetics pass real soon, and may even be done by the time you're watching this video. But I think other than that, it can be a little hard to learn in terms of some of the underlying layers. Again, the item system and the skill system, I had to have that explained to me. I think one of their regulars told me in chat, hey, maybe you should upgrade your gun and your armor during play. That would help you out a lot. And it certainly did. But I definitely see some potential here. For those of you watching this right now, one important thing to mention, the game is going to be free to play, and they're going for similar models like with other MOBAs, that you'll have a normal currency and premium currency, and the various skills that you can choose for your character, those will be randomly or shuffled week by week, similar to champions. The game features a lot in terms of personalization. All your armor bits and various pieces can be swapped and changed just to give your character a little bit more personality, and that will obviously cost the premium currency for it. But the game itself, again, doesn't look like it's going to be play to win in any other aspect, other than, again, acquiring the skills that you want and having them permanently available. But definitely interested to see how this one plays out going forward. And with that said, let's switch to our next game. And that is going to be Super Tofu Friends. This is an endless runner where, as you can tell by our lovely little cube there, the main character is a piece of tofu. The game right now just has the one level in it, but it follows along lines of what we've seen from the runner genre. Keep going as long as you can while collecting these various objects. Now, the yellow tofu blocks, I'm not sure what they represent, if it's just for score purposes, while the red ones are used to unlock new characters. And at this time, I don't know if they'll have like any special features or things along those lines. From playing the game, the levels themselves, as with the runner genre, seem to be procedurally generated as you play, but are built around standard obstacles, such as being able to jump or duck any specific objects, bouncing along things, and you can kind of stretch your tofu into different shapes to avoid different objects, or at least try to. Other than that, there's not much about the game. I think this is still very much considered an early concept. The only issue that I have with the game, at least from its general gameplay, is that it can be kind of hard to read the depth of your character. There are several spots where you have to make small jumps or jump specifically onto something. And without having a shadow, it can be hard to kind of gauge that distance. Again, you see every time we make a jump that it doesn't really show you like where your shadow is at that time. And there really isn't anything else going on with Super Tofu Friends right now from a gameplay loop standpoint. Just keep going until you hit an obstacle. The game did hint at other biomes, which may introduce new kinds of traps or new things to do, and other than that, the game is, well, just kind of like inoffensive in that regard. If you're not a fan of runners, it's not going to do anything for you. But if you're looking for another cute one to play, then give this one a check. But with that said, let's move on to our next game. And this is Null Drifter, and before it gets too crazy, this game does have a faux sensitivity warning to it, so please keep that in mind if you do suffer from that. This was a game that was pitched as kind of a lo-fi, kind of shmup survival game. Think something along the lines of Geometry Wars. And while you can't hear it, there's also a hip-hop soundtrack to it. Now, looking at this game, like, I was kind of confused if this is supposed to be built off of another game or the precursor to a title, because there's references of that as you beat certain levels. But the general play, of course, is see how long you can survive against ever-increasingly more dangerous waves of enemies. The twists of the game come in the fact that your main form of damage is in this dash that you can see me do, well, very regularly in this video. As you're dashing, you do gain iframes from it. And the game does a really good job of, I think, putting you in that sense of flow that is essential for shmup or score chasing purposes. As the levels get higher, more enemies are introduced, including those that can basically fill the arena with lasers if you don't kill them fast enough. And you'll also get upgrades in the form of more health, improving your weapons, and again, just the standard stuff. The money that I'm collecting right now is used for the persistence that allows you to start off with higher health, higher damage, faster speed, you get the picture. But the game is entirely enjoyable right from the get-go. I like the design of the enemies as well, and I think they said this is like a 1-bit kind of game, but it does have pretty nice detail to these enemies. With that said though, there isn't anything else really going on in this game, and like a lot of the score chasers, I hit that point where I was just going through the motions of playing and not really seeing anything new to it. The game, for a very smart decision, does unlock new bosses and situations the more you play, but it does seem very slow in terms of that kind of unlock system. By like my 3rd or 4th play, I was already getting up to like levels 15 and 20 pretty reliably. Another big point, as you probably could guess by this footage, this game can be very hard on your eyes. If you're watching this right now on YouTube, you can probably see how it's kind of has like that magic eye effect and like that little blur on a lot of objects, especially on the menu screen, and this really began to hurt my eyes after playing for extended periods, and I couldn't see myself doing more than maybe 20 to 30 minutes of this game in a single setting. And again, keep in mind that if you are sensitive or photosensitivity or suffer like that, this is not the game for you. But from a gameplay standpoint, this is a pretty good take on the genre, and that sense of flow is something that we really don't see a lot from other examples of it. So, with that said, let's move on to our next title. And we switch over to Spaceland, which I guess could be described as like a PG or G-rated XCOM. And the game itself, actually, I wasn't really expecting a lot going into it, but it did kind of win me over in the end. So, the general concept, like we said, is that this is an XCOM style game or tactical strategy based design. Instead of it being a mega campaign or persistent campaign, it's just essentially a series of missions. Our brave crew has crash landed at a mysterious outpost. It's full of aliens, and of course, we're going to have to save who's left, one area at a time. The missions themselves feature some semblance of a reward structure. The better you play, you'll unlock gold, which can then be used to buy new gear, as well as getting those microchips for completing specific objectives, which in turn will allow you to go up a very basic tech tree. Each character essentially has 2 tiers, and that's about it. In terms of the gameplay, the design, again, is what we've seen from a lot of tactical strategy-based games before. Characters have action points that dictate how much they can move, how many times they can fire, etc., etc. The UI does a really good job, I must say, of conveying that information to the player, as you can see how far they can move and shoot, and basically get that information as readily available as they can. Characters gain special abilities, as you see at the bottom of the screen, and each character is their own unique person, so there's no squatty design in this, like there is in XCOM. The missions themselves are hard-coded and handmade, and usually involve you either killing specific enemies, stopping them from basically coming out of the ground, or getting to a specific point, similar to something like the old Space Hulk games. Now, there is RNG, as you can see, with shots fired, but typically the closer you get, the higher your accuracy is. That would be, I think, the only real nitpick that I have about the UI, is that it doesn't really show you, basically, best range, or optimal range for your weapon. Our guy with the cowboy hair there is a shotgunner, so his gun is better at close range, but our friend here has kind of a machine gun. In terms of squad size, I believe the limit is going to be 3 characters. By the end of our play, we did unlock 4. And again, each one has their own abilities to it. In terms of kind of management that's going on in each one of these missions, you have to pay attention to characters' ammo, as you'll gain ammo by picking it up from various refuel boxes, as you can see at the top of the screen there. But certain characters gain abilities that don't cost ammo. That's what our very much Space Marine inspired guy right there can use. And you can also make use of Overwatch, as you just saw there. But I really like this game. I'm always a fan of titles that try to streamline a tactical strategy design to make it easier to learn for more people. It was one of the reasons why I really like Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle. If there was anything that I had to really complain about, is that the game does feel a little bit repetitive. Again, the systems themselves are nowhere near as complex as we would see in an XCOM style game, but if you're a fan of tactical strategy and looking for something that's a little easier to learn, or something that's really great as like a first-timers play, I would say definitely give Spaceland a check. And this will be one that I wouldn't mind going back to see if we can finish it on stream. And with that said, let's switch over to our next game. So this is Third Eye. And this is an adventure, but feels more like a kind of a visual novel style game, where we're supposedly controlling characters based off of, I guess, a tofu project, or something along those lines. And this is probably my least favorite game of the night. From what we played, it is your standard affair of just walking from left to right. There are some puzzles, but it's more about the creepiness of the game than it is about the gameplay itself. And unfortunately, not a lot really happened during our play of it. The titular Third Eye is kind of like a special power we can activate, which you can kind of see in the bottom right hand corner of the screen, that supposedly lets us see more disturbing sights and is used for some puzzle solving. But if you use it too much, your character will die unless you use eye drops. There's no voice acting, and unfortunately this is one of those games that just doesn't really work for a streaming atmosphere or really for my audience, because we need actual gameplay. And with that, let's move along to our next title. And we go from little gameplay to a whole lot with Profane. Probably the hardest game that we played of the night. This is a top-down kind of twin-stick shooter, but with a focus on boss rushing as opposed to general gameplay. We are trying, I believe, to save the world from these corrupted guardians or evil spirits, and we're going to do that by shooting them a whole lot, and a whole lot of times for each round. The twist of the game is how time is a factor. After each fight, we can assign special moves as well as passive perks to our character. The special moves have a time cost simply to put them on, while the special perks are simply limited by the fact that we can only assign 4 at a time. And as you play through, you're going to unlock more powers, as well as your overall time will change depending upon the boss in question. All the bosses in this game are unique enemies, and they have essentially kind of fixed patterns to their fights. As you go through the battle, the boss will change based on the pattern or the cycle that you're on. And my bar is kind of blocking things at the moment, but you can kind of see how many bars a boss has, and then that moves on to the next cycle. The twist is that your time, as you can see, is constantly counting down the top, and whenever you take damage, it will basically eat up a few seconds of your time. Beat the phase of the boss, he moves on to the next one, and it will be, of course, harder to deal with. Now, if you run out of time, it's not game over. Simply that means that if you take any more damage at 0 seconds, that kills you, and then you must restart the fight. And you must restart all bosses from their original phase. Now, in terms of what you have access to, you don't really have a lot of moves. Other than the abilities that you can equip, you're basically going to be moving and shooting. What you see right now is that little orbital kind of floating around. That's one of the passives that I can choose. And as you beat more bosses, you're going to have to start picking and choosing what passives and active abilities you're going to take into combat. Now, the bosses themselves are all very difficult to fight, and I do like the fact that they are unique. From what we played on stream, none of the bosses will repeat or have the same kind of moves or challenges to them. With that said, though, I do have a few concerns about this game. It is on the hard side, as we said, but some of it feels like it's inherently designed to be frustrating rather than to provide a fair challenge. For instance, you'll go and run into bosses such as that totem pole fight where there are so many bullets on screen that there's just no way that you can adequately dodge them and you're going to take hits. You also don't really have any iframes as well. I think there's a passive that may give you more, but once you start getting hit, it's very easy to keep taking damage and just waste all your time. Now, another thing you probably have noticed is that it's very hard to see your character. All the environments are very huge, and the character model quickly becomes just completely overtaken by the environment and details going on. And this can become very hard when the enemy starts filling the arena with bullets and projectiles and other things like those homing orbs right there. The game seems to make itself that you want to essentially equip a different kit of passive and active abilities to take advantage of each boss. For this fight, I made use of kind of my Mega Beam to just hit all the sections of him and do massive damage like that. But there's not enough, I feel, from a technical layer to make this game interesting. And what I mean is that when you look at a game like Fury or Cuphead, there are advanced game mechanics that you can make use of to reward you by making those fights easier or to promote mastery. In Cuphead, it's getting the proper timing for dodging and the kind of slap attack that you can do on pink bullets. Fury had multiple kinds of attacks, your charge moves. There is essentially more to fighting the boss than just repeating the same action again and again. You could do that, but master players were rewarded by getting through the phases quicker by understanding the rules and mechanics at play. With Profane, we really didn't see that. With each fight being a set of fixed patterns, it meant that it was more about figuring out just what is the puzzle or quirk of this boss, and then can I survive long enough to beat them. And like I said, again, the fact that each boss is a unique fight definitely helps matters, but this was one of those games where I felt that once I stopped playing, I wouldn't feel the desire to keep playing it. So I don't know how much of it there is, but we did get kind of far of it on stream. I did overall like it, and I did like it a lot more than the Third Eye. But this is one of those games that you need to be in the mood to play something very hard, or it's just not going to be for you. So with that said, let's move on to our next game as I'm about to dive right here. So for this one, we have Legend of Keepers. This is an interesting one. It's available on Steam in Early Access and can be played essentially as a free demo right now. And the concept is, what if Dungeon Keeper and Darkest Dungeon had a baby? So the idea is that it's one part pseudo dungeon management, and then the other is the heavy tactical combat oriented play from Darkest Dungeon. So, you are the bad guy here, and it's up to you to essentially build your dungeons, stock it with monsters and traps, and then hopefully deal with all those nasty good guys coming to try and steal your loot and beat your dungeon keeper. So the idea is that you spend the game essentially in two parts. You have kind of the management week by week basis, where you train units, go out on kind of like very basic quests, unlock new stuff, research upgrades, etc. And then you take your minions and you place them here for the combat sections where you try and stop the bad guys, or I'm sorry, the good guys from winning. All the character types and traps are unique elements, and I gotta say the pixel graphics and especially the backgrounds are really amazing in this one. So each character has different attacks that are determined based on their position and what positions on the enemy side they can hit. And similar to Darkest Dungeon, you have health and you have kind of morale or sanity. When you empty the enemy's health bar, they die. When you empty their morale bar, they run away. And you'll gain resources based on how you deal with the enemies, which can then be applied back to your units and such. Now, as you're watching this, you're probably noticing that everybody hits very, very hard in this game. And you do have to be very mindful as to what enemies are in your base, as well as how you're setting up your troops, because you can only have 3 units per room, and then you have to decide how they're going to play with the traps you have in between. If enemies reach your Dungeon Keeper, that character is the most powerful one on the field, but any damage that they take has to be healed over time. So you can't, or you shouldn't let your Dungeon Keeper kind of be the first line of defense here. They're for emergencies only. But skipping ahead, after combat, you get to the game's dungeon management system, where you'll use the rewards that you've earned to upgrade your units, unlock new ones, and kind of do your week-by-week management of your dungeon facilities. This is the part that I was kind of hoping for more, in terms of kind of managing, how units go out, being able to do more in terms of equipping, setting up the dungeon. Again, kind of getting more to that Dungeon Keeper style design. And it seems like the game is very light in that regard, and more focused on the tactical combat, at least for this version. Again, keep in mind that we're playing the early access demo of a game, so what you see in the footage here may not represent the current version of it. But with that said though, of the games that we played on the stream, this one is, I think, perhaps the most interesting in terms of its design, and I do think there is a lot of potential here. This is the one that I think a lot of people we were watching were enjoying the most, just in terms of this kind of gameplay loop. So I'm definitely curious to see where this game goes in the future, and if they're going to add more in terms of the management of the gameplay loop. But at this point, before we get to our next game, we're going to do our quick Patreon supporter and sponsor shout out now, and when we come back, we got even more games to take a look at. And now for a quick thank you to our current Game Wisdom Patreon supporters and sponsors. And if you'd like to continue this discussion on game design, be sure to check out our Discord channel, linked down below. This will probably be the quickest of our spotlights for this video. This is Strategic Mind the Pacific, a war game kind of style title that involves you battling the Japanese and I guess other World War II based enemies, obviously in the Pacific. The game is an interesting one, but unfortunately not the best one for streaming purposes. As I was trying to play this, I had no idea what I was really doing. And it's one of those titles where you probably need to spend a good 30 minutes to an hour just to learn the basics. So unfortunately, there wasn't a lot here for me to be able to look at during our spotlight part of it. But if you're curious about it, it is currently available, and I'm hoping that there are more people who know about this game than I do, or be able to play it. And with that said though, let's move on to something else. And that is Cubic Factorium. This is another early access game, and again, what you see may not represent the current version of it. And this one is an interesting title. It kind of combines the logic gates or kind of logic setup of something that we see from Factorio with more of a very light city builder. And what we have here is a game that kind of tries to, I guess, bridge the gap between the two, making something that still has some level of complexity, but being on the easier side to learn and play for new players. And while I don't think it's quite hit that point yet, there's definitely something here for fans of this kind of design. At the moment, the general gameplay is set up on a series of islands. Each island requires you to hit a mandatory target of goods that you see in the upper left, and then from there you move on to the next island, taking whatever goods you made to that one, and then seeing how far you can go. The developer has already said there are plans for a full campaign as the game continues its early access. But the general gameplay is similar to, again, what we see from city builders and, again, these kinds of logic style games. You set up buildings or production sites, and then you're going to set up where those goods get sent to. In turn, you can then set up these chains of logistics to essentially get products to their correct material upgraders or refiners to then produce the goods. So you could set up your cows in a stable to then have that milk be sent to a brewery or to the bar to then be combined with chocolate to then create chocolate milk. And I'm not kidding, chocolate milk is one of the goods you can make in this game. Every person comes with their own set of skills or what they're good at, and of course, having them work at a job will let them become better at said job. And everything is kind of set up around the logistics and the logic of where you set up storage goods and where those goods will be sent to. For instance, when you have a building or a factory consumer, such as the blacksmith right there in the bottom left, the size of the stable, the size of the material hold, determines how many of those goods it will make. And I think I would prefer something a little bit simpler, just being able to say, I want you to make 20 wooden planks, or 20 iron nails, or anything along those lines. Now, you expand your place by building bonfires, and the bonfires themselves act as kind of quasi-territory markers. This is another way that you can set up the logistics of your town. You can say that these people should only work in the red zone, someone else can only work in the blue zone, and you can transfer goods between them using resource transport, such as horse. You can set up trains, even I think you can set up zeppelins or little planes as well. And the game in its tutorial section does go heavy into train organization or to resource management, of being able to set up timings and where things will go. And it looks like there's a lot going on when you get to kind of the mid or end game tech. That's when you have larger areas to go for, and you have to make use of those resource transports to do the job. Now, when we played on stream, we were still on the very basic island, so we did not get to see any of that. But with all that said, there's definitely a lot here for Cupid Factorial. While it doesn't have, I think, the same kind of immediate wow factor as Legend of Keepers did, like I said, if you like Factorio or City Builders, this is definitely one to keep an eye on. In terms of complaints right now, it is, like most of these kinds of games, on the slow side, and I know the developer is working on improving the UI in terms of its playability and making it easier to follow. And again, the logic kind of set up for logistics may take some getting used to because you have to do everything by hand. So if you forget to set up the logic of where materials should go or what a building should be producing, you can easily run into a fault in your production line or your production chain that may be hard to track. But I'm definitely interested in keeping my eye on this one and seeing how it develops, and hopefully having a little bit more refinement for new players to learn what's going on. And if you are curious in this game, I definitely suggest you go through the tutorial that does its best to explain how all the logic and general UI and gameplay works. Now, with all that said, we're going to move on to our next game now. And that is the 12 Labors of Hercules. Now, there's a lot of them in this series. I'm wondering what they're going to do once they get past 12. But each game is essentially a time management kind of strategy title. Your objective is complete objectives while doing it under the time constraint that you see on the bar on the left hand side of the screen. And it's all about figuring out just the best order that you need to complete the tasks at hand, because every task requires certain resources to perform, and you also gain special powers to kind of speed things up. This is one of those games that is very deceptively simple, and the complexity or the challenge of getting the highest score has kind of been one of the reasons that the series has lasted so long. It was originally on mobile and was ported to the PC, and it's one of those kind of guilty pleasure kind of games for me. I've yet to actually finish one all the way through, but I've played each one that has come out, and again, they do a good job of taking this very basic gameplay loop and stretching it as far as they can go. Similar to Cubifactorium, this is one of those games that you know right away whether or not you're really going to enjoy it or not, and if you like this kind of design, there are a lot of games in it for you to play. If you don't, then this is definitely one that you can safely skip. And again, because of how many games there are in the franchise already, we can pretty much let this one go here. For some reason, we're on the moon, and again, each game has kind of a very basic story to frame why we're imagining all these little workers. And I guess Hercules now has a space travel plan. Who knew? And we're going to move on to our final two games next, and these are the games that we had to play on the second stream. So I'm not sure how many people actually got to watch these live. And this one is Damsel. This is a kind of score chase style game where you play as our character Damsel, who's trying to rid the world of vampires. And doing so requires going on a bunch of missions, perform QTEs, and of course save people while doing with the best score possible. I like the comic book style intros to the levels, and the game has a nice look to it. In terms of controls, you have your standards of run, jump, double jump, and be able to form different kinds of attacks to deal with the vampires. As the game goes on, new objectives and basically limitations are introduced, such as being able to kill enemies in coffins, save civilians, disarm bombs, and so on. And the mode that I'm playing on is the hardest one, so they challenge you to keep your combo alive that you can see in the upper right hand corner of the screen. Now, if you fail any objective in a level, you have to restart the level from scratch. But the levels themselves are on the short side, usually like about a minute or so long, depending upon the size of it. And there's a lot that goes on in terms of just kind of keep adding more and more levels to it. However, with that said though, we ran into a very big, pretty much game-breaking problem with Damsel. And it's one that we really don't like to see in games like this. As I said a second ago, the game introduces bombs that you have to disarm in order to save hostages. And the problem with this system is that it requires a QTE in order to be performed right, but the QTE doesn't work all the time. As I was playing this on stream, it seemed to kind of double take my input, meaning that if I hit, let's say, square or on the Xbox controller B, sometimes it'll register that as 2 Bs. And the issue with this kind of design is that it is pass or fail. If you hit the wrong button at any point during the QTE, it counts immediately as a failure. And this is just one of those big examples of why a lot of developers have moved away from QTEs in terms of how annoying they are and what happens if the system doesn't work. And during this play here, there were cases where I purposely didn't press a button and it still registered as me hitting an input. And you can see my little puzzled face in the bottom left hand corner there as I was realizing something was dreadfully wrong with the game. And unfortunately, I don't know if the developers went back to fix this or not, but this kind of problem with the design pretty much makes things almost unplayable. Because when you're playing a score chase heavy extreme game like this where one mistake can cost you, having the game kind of decide to screw you because of a QT is not something that's going to keep people interested in it. And it was a shame because we were kind of getting into kind of the flow and the score chasing of Damsel anyway. Now, for our final game, we turn to one that I'm sure my fans probably have been waiting for me to try out. And that is Philophobia, which I'm pretty sure I keep butchering that pronunciation. This is the game from Tim Ruswick of Game Dev Underground fame. And this has been his baby for the past 4 years in terms of designing his own take on the technical, high-skill focused platformer genre. So the basics of the game are all about you trying to get through each one of these levels as you are trapped in a hell made of hearts, as by the term philophobia, the fear of love. Anytime you are hit, that sends you right back to the start. And you gain several abilities and start with some yourself. You have a shield that can be used to reflect attacks. You'll get a boomerang that can be used to knock objects or knock switches from afar. And you'll get other abilities as the game goes on. There are collectibles hidden in each level, which I'm not sure if there is a purpose other than just for completionist status. But speaking to Tim several times about this, the game definitely has a really great feel to it in terms of its gameplay. This is a challenging game, and for this being Tim's first platformer, as I was telling him, there are a lot of very interesting takes on kind of the challenges and the obstacle design. And some of it may be spoiler related, but the game itself definitely hits you with a lot in terms of what it expects you to do at any time. Later levels throw in a lot of things going on, including avoiding lasers, homing enemies, these kind of hearts that show up when you pass their section, and so on. Now, one thing that you probably have noticed is another unique aspect of Philophobia, and that is the fog of war. You can only see the level based on what your character can see. And Tim talked about this being a very thematic choice for the game, and it's one that I think is probably going to be its most polarizing feature. As we talked about while we were playing this, it does kind of distract from the precision-based design of a platformer. One thing that it did get in the way of is there are several sections where you have to make character-wide platform jumps. And the problem is that with the focus, or with the shadow kind of panning based on the character's position, it can kind of sometimes give the illusion of the platform stretching or thinning out. And that's not good when you need to make a very precise jump. It also makes things a lot harder, as you're going to be dying to things that you're not able to see until you're actually making the leap. And when I talked to him about this, he was very much well aware of that. And like you're seeing on the screen right here, there is a lot of precision-based jumping that you have to make in it. Now, with that said though, the game does a good job of keeping you in the action. Death only stops you for like about maybe a second and a half, and then you're right back in it. And the game does feature some very interesting takes on boss design. And like I said, the level design is very strong in Philophobia. Despite this being Tim's first commercially released platformer, I know he spent a lot of time studying the genre and trying to make his very best version of it. And it definitely shows. The levels themselves are long in some cases, but not too long. And you can tell that there is definitely an eye kept to making sure everything felt different and unique. In terms of like technical or playability issues, there are a few that are kind of like nagging. I ran into a bug in terms of the shield and the jump not working properly, and there's no way to start a new save without editing the kind of your text file or that file of the game. Now, Tim has already said that he's planning on doing an official kind of commercial release of Philophobia on Steam, and that version will have the improvements and fixes in it. The version that you're seeing on the video right now is from his itch.io page. So if you're hoping, or if you want to see like more improvements, or I guess like the best possible version of it, you may want to wait for the Steam version. But it is still very much playable right now. But with all that said, I think that is officially everything that has to do with this month's Spotlight stream. This was a doozy in terms of length. I would like to thank all the developers who submitted games, and if you let me tickle your game for a future Spotlight, please don't hesitate to get in touch. We are doing these at least once a month. But once again, thank you for watching. Come back for daily discussions on game design here, and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. Until next time, take care.